So like a lot of people that get really into barbecue, it was the brisket, the king of barbecue, that captured my imagination. And I used to watch people like Anne Franklin, Malcolm Reed, in fact I still do, but I saw their brisket, saw that what they were producing, and it blew me away. I wanted to be able to make barbecue that good, and I couldn't nail it. This video is me telling you everything I wish I'd known then. Now I hope you love this video. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's get to it. Time to cook a brisket. Okay, so the very first tip is to trim and season the night before. Trimming, you can go and check out, there's loads of videos out there. It's a really good one on Steve Gale's channel, Smoked Tallow Barbecue. Go and check that one out. But the benefit of trimming the night before is that in the morning it saves you loads of time. You don't have to stress about it. You know it's all done, ready to go, and you can just put the pit on, and then when you're ready, add the brisket. And the second reason to kind of like season the night before is that it really helps form that bark. Let's face it, when you're talking about brisket, it's all about that look, that bark, and then all that satisfaction when you actually eat it. But the first thing you're going to do is look at that brisket and it looks horrible, then you're going to think it's going to taste horrible. It might taste amazing. The appearance of your brisket is really what sets it, people going. And by applying the salt, the pepper, you really get that bark started. All that salt starts to penetrate the actual meat. You're going to get a lot bigger smoke ring when you get a Maillard reaction with the smoke and where all that salt's hit it. So it's a real game changer. So a lot of people will season their brisket and bung it on in the morning and then wonder why they don't have a particularly great bark. By doing it the night before, you really give yourself like a real leg up. So to go over what I use to season my brisket, first of all we've got kosher salt. You can see here obviously the brand of the box. I use Diamond White, and I put in a little shaker just to make it nice and easy to adhere. Then we've got 16 mesh black pepper. We've got Sure Shot seeds, and this is their gunpowder, and I use this for like a finishing rub. It's got activated chalk on it and just really helps form the bark. And then this is a bit of a secret ingredient, and this is soy sauce, but it's mushroom. Now the brisket I've got today is a 1953 brisket from John Davison, and I have to say it's absolutely fantastic. If I show you the bottom first, you can see the intermuscular fat that's running throughout this entire brisket. You know you can have a decent brisket when you start off with quality this good. So I'll leave the link below, go and check it out. So as you can see here, the first thing I'm doing is getting that soy sauce, getting a really decent covering across here. This is going to allow our pepper, our salt and everything to stick, and also that mushroom soya just gets that bark going. You already started off with a dark brisket, so it's fantastic. So the reason I do separate pepper and then salt and then Sure Shots is that it allows me to control the amount of each that I'm using. So amount of pepper, amount of salt. I can get a really decent covering, because I found that if you put it all into a bottle and mix it up, well actually you may not get an even distribution. You may get a bit more salt, a bit more pepper, but by doing them as separate layers, it just allows you to get a perfect covering. Now Sure Shot says chalk on it, it's got a bit of MSG in it, and it really, I found, just helps form that bark and gives a beautiful flavour to the brisket. So I'm going to flip it over and do exactly the same on the other side. Now a nice little tip that I don't see anyone else doing is the fact that rather than doing the top and then the sides, I do it in reverse order. I find by doing this I get a really nice covering over the sides of the brisket, and I don't screw up my seasoning on the top of it. As you can see, no finger marks, perfect. Okay, back to the morning after the night before. Another reason that I like to season the night before is that along here I've got a couple of places where I don't think the pepper hit as much as I might like to. So in the morning, it kind of like any bald spots or anything like that, I can just get the old pepper and just give it a bit of a cover up. So of course if you season your brisket and then put it straight back on, so if you season your brisket and put it straight on the smoker, you're not going to see if you missed any bits, or actually you need to do a bit more touch up. But that is looking amazing. So the next tip is to start with a dirty fire. So at the moment the pit is not on at all. I've got coals on, they're lit, they're ready to go. I'm going to add those to start my cold bed off. That's one reason why I do use charcoal to start rather than just starting off with just straight wood. I'm going to add my wood to that charcoal base, and then I'm going to put the brisket straight in the smoker. Now the reason I do that is in the first 3 hours of any brisket cook, that is where your brisket is going to catch the most smoke. So by starting off with that slightly dirty fire, and it's only going to be dirty for like, I don't know, 20 minutes tops, then actually you're going to capture a huge amount of smoke on this, and then that's going to carry through for the rest of the cook. So let's start that fire and put this brisket on. Okay, so I put the brisket in, and let me just explain how I've got my pit set up. So I've got a log to the right hand side, and that's just going to act as a bit of a baffle towards the heat coming from the actual firebox. I've got my brisket and top shelf in the middle. I've got the point towards the actual stack collector. The reason being is that the smoke tends to hit this side of the pit and then come across, so this tends to be a hot spot, and basically the point's got a lot more fat in it, so it can take a bit more heat. And then I've got a probe in both the point and the flat, so I can just keep an eye on it, and they're basically slap bang in the middle of the actual brisket. And then just because I'm a bit of a geek, even though I've got my actual gauge on the pit itself, I do like to do digital ones as well, because I like to record the data and see what went well, what didn't, and temperature fluctuations, that sort of thing. So I've got a pit probe here, and I've got a pit probe there. I'm using the Thermopen signals, and this is such a good piece of kit. If you're on the lookout for a digital thermometer, get yourself one of those. But because it's got 4 sensors, I can like stick an extra probe in the pit just to see where it is either side of it. Okay, so the next tip is our trimmings. So these are all the fat trimmings that we took off last night, and I've put them in this pan, and they're going to stay in this smoker throughout the whole time until we wrap the actual brisket. Now the idea being is that we're going to render down this fat, get all that beautiful tallow out. It's going to catch a load of smoke as well, and then when we add that to the wrap, to our brisket, it's going to add some more smoky flavour back in, as well as add some of the fat in that would have come out the brisket anyway. So it's just a really nice way of adding loads of fat in, loads of flavour back in, and just helps your brisket get extra juicy when you slice it. So I'm going to shut this down now, and then I'm going to talk you through the plan. So the next tip is to actually plan your cookout. So this is my free meat smoking planner, and there's a link to this down in the description. No charge, just go and download it, print it out, and then just use it to plan and then record your cooks. The purpose of doing that, and the benefit of doing that, by the time you get to the end of the cook and you produce like a brisket that's amazing, you think, well, that was so good, I want to repeat that. And then just having the information and trying to keep a record of what's gone on during the cook is going to help you try and replicate that. Alternatively, if something went a bit pear-shaped, you think, okay, well that didn't work, well actually I won't do that next time. And this is just a record that you can make of what worked well and what didn't. So I'm not going to bother filling it all out. The bit we're going to focus on is actually planning our cook. So probably easier if I flip this over. Okay, so let's plan our cook. And I just want to explain the next tip is temperatures. So a lot of people will put their brisket on and we'll say this is the wrap stage, and they would run the whole thing at like 225 or 275, depending whether or not you're doing hot or fast, and obviously this is in Fahrenheit. So, and they won't change, they will just cook the whole thing and just that's it, just run it at that temperature, job done as far as they're concerned. But I like to try and do it in stages of 3. So if I divide this up, so this is when we're going to wrap. So when I wrap, I want the internal temperature to be about 170, something like that. But that depends on the bark. So when we get to that point, I'll talk about the cues I'm looking at for what I look for when I wrap. But roughly, I want the internal temperature to be about 170, which is kind of like 77 degrees Celsius. So for the first 3 hours, I'm going to run the pit at 250 Fahrenheit, which is about 121 degrees Celsius. Okay, The reason for that is that it's the first 3 hours that I think you get the maximum amount of smoke onto your brisket, and that's obviously another reason why we've done the dirty smoke. So it's the first 3 hours. I'm going to run it at 250, and the purpose of that first 3 hours isn't to really cook the brisket as such, it's just to get as much smoke on as possible. And I found that 250 is a really good sort of temperature to get a really decent amount of smoke on there. The next 3 hours, so we're up to 6 at this point, I'm going to run the pit at about 275. Now the reason I want to do 275, and that's about 135 degrees Celsius, is that I want to push it towards the stall. So the stall's going to hit roughly about 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's roughly what I'm hoping by the end of that first 6 hours that I've got to the point where it's entering the stall. Won't be through the stall, but it'll be entering the stall. And then once it's in the stall, then it's however long it takes to get to the point where I'm then happy to wrap it. But by bumping it up to the 275, then it's going to help push it towards there. Once it hits the stall, I'm going to then bump it up to 285 plus. So I may bump it more, I may go up to 290, you know, but really 285 I kind of found is a bit of a sweet spot, and that's 140 degrees centigrade. And then once we're getting there, we're literally going to keep pushing it until we hit the wrap. Once we're in the wrap stage, well then I'm going to carry on maintaining it at that higher temperature, so 285, even might drop it down to 275, depends how it's doing. And I'm just going to carry on going until the brisket is finished. And I'll talk about the cues that we need to look for when we wrap it. I just noticed I've got a dirty finger, excuse that. So I'm going to talk you through the cues that I look for in order to think, right, okay, now I need to wrap. And then also we're going to look at what the cues are to see that the actual brisket is finished. There, cool. Right, so that's our plan. I will check back with you guys at the end of this first 3 hours, and we'll see how the brisket is doing, and we'll talk you through the next stage. So we are at 3 hour mark now, and you can see here the fat is still really tight, so it's not rendered here. And the other thing I'm kind of like looking for is like the general bark formation. So you'll notice throughout the cook process there's like different, I guess, sweat profiles. You'll basically get kind of a very dry brisket, then it'll start being wet with all the water starting to come out of it, and you can kind of see around here, particularly here, it kind of should show up quite nice on the camera. It looks wet, and then it starts to go dry again, and then as it progresses through the cook, so you see that turns kind of like a yellow sort of caramel sort of colour, and that'd be absolutely gorgeous. But so far the colour on this, the bark that's forming, is looking fantastic. So I'm going to shut it back down again. I'm not spritzing or anything on here because I'm quite happy how everything's looking. I'm going to just shut it down and let that carry on cooking. Okay, so we're now at about the 5 hour mark. You can see like what the temps are doing. Obviously the flat is quite a fire bar, it's gone through the stall. The point is still in there, but you can see how the surface of the brisket looks really wet, and obviously that's a sign of all the moisture and water content coming out. So we need to carry on pushing through this, but the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a bit of tin foil, and I'm just going to shield this end of this flat, just because it's quite a bit in advance of that. I don't want it to dry out too much and cook too much. So I'm just going to put some tin foil on the back of here, or to cover this section. So you can see here I've like put tin foil around this part of it, and that's just to protect it from the heat. But you also notice it's the reflective side out, so it reflects that radiant heat away from the actual brisket, and hopefully I'll see this part, the actual point, start catching up with this. But at this point I have not spritzed at all, so this is completely as it is, no spritzing, no nothing like that. And you can see the bark that is developing is incredible, looking really good. So just to show you, we're at the 6 hour mark now, we're just over, and using that tin foil has basically allowed pretty much the point to catch up with the flat. So you've got 178 against 173, You can see there, as we talked about earlier on, I bumped the temperature up to around the 275 mark, and you can see the pit is running really nice and evenly. So I'm going to check the bark, and then we can decide whether or not we're going to wrap it or not. Okay, so we can see here, you got the, ignore the temperatures on the pit because I've got the door open, so they're commenting now. So if you look at the temperature for the flat and the point, you reckon there's about 170 or 178, 171. But if you look at the surface, it is still wet, and that tells me that I'm not ready to wrap yet. So even though you can see here that fat is starting to render really nicely, you can see that caramel colour that you're looking for, because there's still quite a lot of moisture and wetness on the actual brisket itself, and I need to tip that because that looks like it's pulling a bit there. It's not ready to wrap yet. So once it goes through this stage, so the actual surface is more or less dry, it's not going to be totally dry everywhere, but it's more or less dry, then that will tell me, right, time to wrap. Okay, so it's been another half an hour, and I just want to come and see where this is doing. So another cue that you can look for to see whether or not it's time for wrapping is just basically giving it a probe, and you basically, what you're looking for is how tender it is. So you're not looking for like going through butter tenderness, but you're actually kind of like feeling whether or not how far off it is really. So feeling wise, it's really soft here, tighter there, soft there, pretty soft there, tighter there, and then really soft there. And also I can see here, so like, see this fat, this is really rendered, whereas this fat over here is a bit tighter. So I'm going to give this about another half an hour, bump the temperatures up a bit as well, and in half an hour I think it should be time to wrap this. Okay, cool. So if you're liking these videos, if you find it helpful, please hit that subscribe button. There's tons more content coming to this channel, and by hitting that subscribe button you're telling me that actually this is sort of content you like and I can make more of it. Don't forget to hit the old thumbs up as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through this next stage before you're actually watching me do it. So I've got 2 sheets of unwaxed butcher's paper. I've got something called ghee, and ghee is like clarified butter. You can pick up in any supermarket. It's really about £6 for that. And basically that adds a really kind of like a beautiful sort of mellow sort of, you know, buttery taste, funnily enough, to the actual brisket as well. So we're going to utilise that. We're also going to utilise the tallow that we've rendered out the fat that we trimmed off this brisket last night, so we're going to add that to the paper as well. And then also I've got in this spray bottle just some water and then some of the soya sauce that I used last night as a binding agent for the brisket. So that's all we've got now. So it's really not important but helpful that you do this process as quick as possible, because as soon as you take the brisket out of the smoker, it's going to start cooling down, and therefore you've got to recover all of that temperature back, and then you've got to carry on cooking as well. So you don't have to wrap, so if you wanted to you could just carry on cooking until it's probe tender. It's my fault that if you're not careful you're going to end up with a dry brisket. By wrapping it in butcher's paper, and I don't ever use tin foil because you just destroy the bark that you've worked so hard to form. I use butcher's paper because it retains quite a lot of the fat, but also does allow it to breathe a little bit, so you keep that bark as much as possible. And to be honest, like we said at the very beginning, that's kind of one of the most important things. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is spray the butcher's paper. So we can get going. There you go. So by spraying it, you kind of like make it more malleable, and it's a lot easier to work with that way. Next, I'm going to get my tallow. So I'm going to aim to put my brisket along here. Along here, I'm going to put a decent amount in there. All that flavour in there. Next, I'm going to get my tallow. So you can see here, we've rendered out quite a lot of fat, and this will just add so much flavour back in. And then we have our brisket, and you can see that is looking absolutely gorgeous. So I purposely put the tallow and everything like that on the bottom not on the top. I want to try and preserve this bark as much as possible. But if you look at that bark, it's beautiful and dark. You've got all this fat that's rendered down. I need to make sure I've got it dead in the middle. So fold this board like this, and then with the corners you fold it over, and then if you crease it, and then you fold this side as well, then crease this side. And then we're going to fold the brisket over, remembering this is your top here. Fold it again. And then with that last bit, I'm going to fold that back underneath, and that's it. Final thing I like to do is just squeeze the sides around, just to try and make this as tight as possible. And you can see that looks really good. So I'm going to put a probe back in this now, stick it back in the smoker. Then when it's reached about 205, or I think it's totally probe tender, then it's time to pull it off. Okay, so the pen signals is telling me that everything's hitting 203, but basically there's another couple of tests that we need to do to make sure everything is as we need it to be. And the first one of those is that I'm going to get my pen 1, and as you can see where I've been testing before, I'm just going to probe. So I'm probing for tenderness, so you can see that is just sliding in and out with literally no effort whatsoever. And here, yeah, literally no resistance at all. People have used the description of like knife through warm butter, and that's kind of like a real, there's basically no resistance. You just slide it in and out and you think, actually, am I poking into anything? That's kind of like the best way to describe it. And the other thing we're going to do is fill underneath. So that's really soft. I'm digging my fingers into the bottom of it, and it's feeling really pliable, really soft, lots of give in it, and that's kind of like telling me that actually it's done. So the next thing we need to do is rest this brisket, and this is crazy important. It really is. If you don't listen to any other tip I give you in this entire video, listen to this one. So personally, I have a master built smoker. I can put it down to 145 degrees, and I would just let it sit in there for like 10 hours, 12 hours until I need to actually get it out to slice it for wherever my guests are. But because I want to show you this entire process in one video, I'm basically going to slice it today. So I need to allow it to rest, and I need to allow it to rest to get down to 145 degrees Fahrenheit. Now there's a couple of reasons why you need to let it rest. Firstly, if you are to take it out now and it's like 203 and slice it, I'll have loads of steam come out, and basically that's all my moisture just evaporating, and all that hard work to get a really juicy moist brisket just gone. So by allowing it to come down to 145, you slice it, you get minimal amounts of steam come out, and that means all that moisture stays within the brisket itself. The other reason is that basically allowing that brisket to take its time to rest means that all those juices will redistribute throughout the entire brisket, so that you'll get beautiful slices throughout the whole thing. Right, so here we are guys, it's now like 9:30 at night. I've got every single light I own on. My meter's going, I can't see because there's so many lights blinding me, but the brisket has finally come down to 147, and to me that's it. I'm going to do it. So we're going to get this out, we're going to unwrap it, going to slice it, and we're going to see how we did. Now I am proper excited about this. This has to be, just by the feel and how this cook's gone, it definitely has to be one of my best briskets ever. And I want to say thank you to John Davison who supplied this brisket. It is top notch. Right, without any further ado, let's get it. Now look at the bend on that. So I've got a big board because I don't want to lose any of these juices, but I have got the tallow we rendered out the fat, so if anything does need a little bit of a splodge, I can do it. Now look at that. That is a thing of beauty. Look at the jiggle on that. Look at that. Oh yeah, spank it. Lovely. You've got to spank it. If you cooked it long, you've got the right to spank it. Right, let's get this out. I'm going to pour that tallow on the board. So the reason I'm doing that is, firstly, there's still quite a lot of flavour in that, and secondly, as soon as you start to slice into this brisket, it's going to literally die. They say it dies on the board. So I've got my Dow Strong slicing knife. If you haven't got one of these, go get it, it's incredible. Right, so I'm going to slice between the, oh look at that jiggle. I'm going to slice between the point and the flat, and this is the money shot. Now look at that. That is a thing of beauty. Now I'm going to get some tallow, smother that on, that'll stop that oxidizing. Do the same for this side as well. I am so excited about this. So I'm going to take a bit off the side first. These are your burnt ends. It's like the real amazing. I mean, look at that. That just looks absolutely incredible. I can't wait for it. I've got to have a taste. And look at that. Now, time for a bite. Man, that is good. You know when you've nailed the brisket. So remembering, oh, so good. So remembering, flat we cut this way, and then the point we basically cut across. So originally, obviously, it was like that, and we cut across. Because of the way the grain's going, we need to make sure we cut it the right way. Otherwise, even though you cooked it to perfection, it's going to be tough as old boots. So this is the fun bit. Let's take a few slices. And look at that. That's when you know you cooked it right. Let's do a pull test. Yeah, no effort whatsoever. It just comes apart like anything. I just can't stop eating it. That fat is beautifully rendered down. You've got all that caramelization there, so that fat's gone, like, just squeeze it with your fingers and it just disintegrates. And then all the fat that's between the meat, you can see that's all rendered down beautifully. And this, remember, is the flat, so this is the hard one to cook. This one, because it's so full of fat, is really forgiving. This one, not so much. But because we cooked it so well, it's literally juicy, succulent and tender. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I thoroughly have. This brisket is amazing. It is just cooked to perfection. There is nothing I would want differently on this brisket. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video as well. If you have, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give the old video a thumbs up as well, and go and check out this one when I show you the 8 pro tips on how to cook the perfect beef ribs. But until next video, take care of yourself, and I'll see you then.